To understand how I kind of moved through my 7 months of unwilling, unlawful incarceration, you kind of have to understand my mental health background and what I needed to do to keep myself healthy mentally and physically and spiritually, and what kind of shaped my background going into this. I've talked about having PTSD, and that's something that is frustrating because right now it's a term that's used a lot, and a lot of Americans think they understand it. I would say my biggest problem, I love the work that Mariska Haggerty has done to clear up rape kits. I think she's a very talented actress and a really good person. But the character she plays, Olivia Benson, for me, as my trauma response is dissociation and freezing. The kind of Olivia Benson model, I find very creepy. So it's often very hard for me to talk to liberal white women who don't have any background of abuse in a meaningful way. It's often difficult to talk about my experiences because they're very emotionally needy. Like you start talking and they interrupt. I just want to let you know that I'm going to make a safe space. And it's like, well, safe is just like breathing and listening. And then I talk, or I just want you to know it's not your fault. And it's like, well, it's your fault for interrupting me and making that a question, which kind of is actually minimizing me and putting you in a position of power, and maybe shut the fuck up. Or I just want you to know that I have training in trauma background. And it's like, oh, so we know that it's about you and making sure that, and so that you just don't talk about things with people who can't handle it. So ironically, I find sometimes the only people who talk meaningfully about child abuse, I forget, you can't even probably use that, CA, um, is comedians. And then everyone attacks them. And it's like, yeah, Dave Chappelle's crude when he talks about what happens to kids, but at least he talks about it. So I guess that's the first way to start understanding my trauma response, because I do have a freeze response, freeze or fawn. Most people have a combination of responses. Um, so when people are overly emotional, sometimes that can be threatening. And that's because of a lot of relationships where people have manipulated me. So that's frustrating because when I mention I have PTSD, people assume um, they assume that I'm violent, that I have a fight response. I have a pathologically low response in terms of anger. That's caused me a lot of problems. But people hear that term, so they make assumptions, or that I have intrusive thoughts. Because I have a freeze response, I more often have trouble, like years where I don't remember things because of trauma, black spots, and that diminishes credibility, which is another reason not to talk about it. But to understand how I've kind of moved through the world over the last 20 years and how I moved through jail, how I'm currently moving through my situation, my background is really important. Uh, as I've mentioned, I had a lot of privilege. I've had a lot of access to the best education and job opportunities. I've had a lot of people help me out. I had a lot of cultural capital in my family, people who went to college. So I don't think I would be who I am today without um, all those privileges and people in my community helping me along the way. And it's also important to understand that when all of this stuff started happening with the court, years before I was ever somebody who might be arrested, I was throughout most of my life an overachiever, a perfectionist who kind of went above and beyond. I think sometimes people get the wrong idea that I'm a bimbo or that I was used to getting things because of my looks. And that definitely was not my background before my marriage in any way. My parents were kind of like wasps and bees. If you remember the old Saturday Night Live skit, my dad came from a well off family, and my mom came from Catholic, more working class background, but middle class. Her parents owned a bar. And, but our families got along well together. I always had a pretty close extended family, even though my parents divorced when I was a baby. And my dad was in the UP, which was like 8 hours away. So I rarely saw my dad, but I saw his relatives often. We were very close to them. When my parents divorced, my mom had only had 1 year of college and she trained as a woodworker. And there were no jobs in the area. There still are no jobs in the area where I was born in the center of the state. So she moved us to Holland for jobs. And she got, I think something happened with like real estate with the money from selling the farm. I don't know. But we had a house. And then my mom, because she was a carpenter, she got a union job at Baker Furniture doing veneer work, like finishing work. Um, But there was a lot of sexual harassment. They didn't really call it that. It was like 1980, and I was 3. I was born in 1977. And the men would like empty the tampon dispenser on her workstation or glue her tools. And then there was a man. This kind of often happens where there's like a man you think you're friends with, and then he flips on you. And that was what happened at work. And he was like following her to her car and threatening her. People put like a pink slip for her in the suggestion box. And then because it was an industrial wood shop, they have, I've never seen it, but I can imagine a wall sander. So instead of, like a circular sander is like a strip of paper, it's a wall of sandpaper. And, this man who was 6 foot, my mom's 5'3", tried to push her face into the wall sander and she pushed him back. And so she got fired because that's how you fire someone when they're in the union. You get them to hit you. And we became homeless. We lived in people's yards in a tent for about 9 months. And I saw Lady Di get married. So that's when the time was. Because we had a TV in our tent that would like plug in when we lived at like a state park. But I remember like one time we stayed at a quarry and I couldn't swim. And I knew that if I fell in, I'd die. Like, that was kind of my childhood. That's like a lot of 70s hippie childhoods is better not make a mistake or you'll die. And so we become competent, but a little anxious. um, and then my mom got us a house. She was from a small town, so she wasn't used to like bad neighborhoods. I'll never be able to explain my mom or like Peter or a lot of people in my life who are this type because the way they are is really confusing. I really, I don't know to what extent my mom purposely made me not protect myself, whether she just was neglectful because she was overwhelmed by her own issues. Sometimes in aggregate, it kind of looks like she wanted me to get hurt. And the reason I say I think she sometimes wanted me to be hurt is because my mom is really, really smart. When she later got a job at Herman Miller at the chair plant, she got a job as a scheduler because she could switch from base 10 number system to base 6 number system. And time is usually like in units of 60. Because the nuns taught her new math. And most people aren't aware that they're using base 10. So my mom is very smart and she's very well read. That's why when she's like, whoopsie, it's confusing, right? That's what I mean. I'll never know if she did it on purpose. But because she would do things like, she would say that because she was from a small town, people in small towns don't lock their doors. So we didn't lock our door. So I didn't get a key. So I never called myself a latchkey kid because when I was 7, the door was just always unlocked and I wasn't supposed to lock the door. But my mom knew it was a dangerous neighborhood because the people next door were like rednecks and They'd had fights and like hit a man's head against our wall, and my mom had to go to the grocery store to call the cops. She knew, and then there were bikers down the street who would have sex in the yard. There were scary people, and she talks about that, but she never told me to lock the door, which is just weird. Um, and then later, when I got she let me get my own phone line, so I wouldn't use hers, and it was when she was working at the factory and making good money. But she didn't want to put my name in the phone book, so she put Teen Line, which was not the safer choice. And it's like she would make choices like that just that didn't make sense. And I really don't know if she just never told me that people might hurt me and I should be careful, or I should come home at night or have a curfew, things like that. But when I was little, um, when she finally started working, there was this nice Baptist couple who babysat us, and since they wanted us to be saved, they were happy to keep us extra. And so between the ages of like 2.5 and 7, that's when a lot of I don't have a lot of memory, but our neighborhood, it was scary. And I remember like the neighbors next, well, on the one side, our neighbors from Cambodia were really nice and took care of us, and they fed me rice with pickles or rice with a fried egg. But the other side were this kid Kenny's family, and they were scary because like I'd seen the dad like lift up the leash, like the dog by the leash, and hit it, and like they were like so scary. And my mom, like, here's the thing that people don't know about poor people. Like, poor people are always snobbish too. Like, you go into a homeless shelter, and the people are going to tell you who are the good homeless and who are the ratchet homeless. Like, poor people are snobs too. And so my mom was kind of a snob to the rednecks next door. And that was confusing to me because I was like developing like my understanding of class. And I'm like, well, they seem to have so much more shit than us. And we don't have an upstairs. I think their house has an upstairs. I always wanted to know because I always thought if people had 2 stories, because we never had enough bedrooms and I'd have to share a room with my brother. So I always thought if somebody's rich, they're going to have an upstairs. And so I was just confused because like she was always like saying, and I wasn't supposed, because she said that they were bad. I wasn't supposed to go in their house. I was only supposed to play with Kenny outside. But then I remember one day their house was struck by lightning, and they like pulled out all the melted appliances, and it was like color TV. And you couldn't tell it was color, but you could tell it was big. And microwave. And we just had like a black and white TV and no phone. And I was like, why do they have all this shit if they're rednecks and we're not? And so I really wanted to see his house. I really wanted to see inside. And I know that his cousin, I don't remember what happened. I know his cousin did something to me because I wanted to see if he had shit inside. But I don't remember. But and it's like, it's hard when you go through, because I have gone through therapy for things like that. And there is no way to recover repressed memories. You're just supposed to remember when you feel safe, but that's never happened for me yet. So I always assume someday I'll feel safe and I'll remember things, but I am not safe. But that was the only memory. It was like a flashback. And my mom really wanted me to be gifted. She wanted both of us to be gifted. I think she preferred my brother because he liked science fiction and reading and was more dependent on her. I was more independent. We just never jived, but not the way she did with my brother. And, but she still wanted me to be smart to make her look good. So, I did that for her. But, um, I was also really ugly. So, that gave me a different, I mean, it's ugly and different. I had what's called cradle rot because I'd been left alone with a bottle, and so all my teeth rotted. So I basically had a mouth full of it was like Aldi version of Nelly, like silver caps, and so I would smell like this. And my mom, she just always told me everything that was wrong with me and how I looked. It was something that actually distressed her. Sometimes it would make her cry. how ugly I was. It was really hard for her. Um, I remember like when I was like a sophomore in college, I went home and we were like watching a movie. I'm just like doing my thing, trying to be me. She's like, and I was like, what's going on, Mom? This is the last time I lived at home. And she said, I'm just so sad that you'll never be able to be an actress because unless you get plastic surgery because your nose and it's not even like you're Jewish. I would understand. Because I guess you can have a big nose if you're Jewish, but you can't be an ugly Gentile girl. Um, she wanted me to know that my hair was bad because it couldn't perm, that my forehead was too long, that my nose was too big, my eyes are too close together, my skin was too pale, my skin wouldn't tan, my skin is bad because it wouldn't tan, my shoulders are too wide, my arms are too long, my hands are too big, my torso is too short, my boobs are big enough, but they're not perfect. And you know what? Actually, having big boobs is a problem because you remember Dagwood's cousins. His girls got big boobs, and that was a joke. It's bad to be sexy because then you're a slut. So it's bad to have big boobs, but you better have big boobs because grandma's a B cup and grandpa wasn't happy with the B cup. So you have to have big boobs. But when you have big boobs, you're going to be a slut like your fucking cousins. So, and then your waist is too fat and too wide. And then your hips are too narrow. But your legs are long. That's nice. But you can't wear shorts that are too short. You can't wear skirts that are too short because your legs are too long. But then your legs are so pale because your skin can't tan. And then your feet are too big, and your feet are too big, and they're too big. So you just wear a size too small because your feet are too big. And why would we go and get you shoes that fit your feet? Because your feet are too big and they're ugly. So they're 11. We'll stick them in 10. We'll see what happens. And just every day letting me know how ugly I was, just because she didn't want me to be confused. So I didn't grow up a pretty girl, and I didn't grow up with that entitlement. And I think that gave me a lot of empathy and made me who I am today. But it also made me, obviously, really vulnerable to any idiot who says I'm pretty. And it's something you never really get over. It's a pretty deep wound and a pretty deep vulnerability. And often girls will be told that they're pretty by another family member. And that's just also, I think, not the style. We're not effusive in my family. Nobody wants anybody to get a big head. We really worry about people getting big heads. And a lot of times people's fathers like them, and my dad did not. I understood it. I understand things differently with what I know now. When I was little, I just know that, my dad has a hair trigger temper. And in the 80s, he was into cocaine and speed and a truck driver. So, I mean, if you don't think that's terrifying, then you've never met a truck driver. And so I remember the first time he picked me up in his semi truck, I flipped out and I would get sick and throw up, and he would get mad and he would say, I think that you're getting sick on purpose. And that was when I started getting sick. And I don't think my dad did anything. I think I was just scared of the truck, and I was scared of his temper. Because he was one of those dads who would pull off his belt when he got mad. And one time, because my brother's 3 years older and bigger, and I was probably 2, and I hit him with my overalls, and my dad wanted me to learn that, Oshkosh overalls have a buckle on it. And that so Megan, when you're roughhousing with your brother, you shouldn't hit him with the buckle because it could hurt him. But he showed it to me by hitting my coloring book and shredding it in front of me with the buckle so that I would know what would happen if I went like this to my brother, which it would be much more likely that him doing the coloring book, he would accidentally hit me and take out an eye. But that wasn't a kind of conversation he was wanting to have at that moment. But that was what my dad was like. And my brother and mom also are very, they're quick and prone to very, very, very high levels of anger. So I became very, very sensitive to other people. And I, just started being able to feel how other people are before they do, so that I can keep them happy. And that's why I'm good with babies and men. But I just started getting sick during that period when I was going to the Snyders, chronically ill. And then I was finally, when I was 6, I was in first grade. I was out all the time. I was out all the time, like tonsillitis, chicken pox, tonsillitis, ear infections, tonsillitis. And then finally, my throat started closing up, and I had to go to the hospital. And I had to be there for 10 days. And my throat was closing, and they didn't know what was wrong. And finally, they realized I had mononucleosis when I was 6. And I don't understand why nobody tried to figure out how I got it, because the doctor made me really mad, because he would say, "You got the kissing disease." And I was mad because I didn't, I wasn't supposed to be kissing anyone. But mono is considered a venereal disease, and it only passes through saliva. It doesn't pass in elementary schools, it passes in high schools. That's why nobody at my school had it, and nobody in my family had it. But nobody asked how I got it. And I don't understand why. But as I was a teenager, I guess they call it, was a teenager, I guess they call it body dysmorphia, because I was mostly obsessed with how I looked and feeling like I was very ugly. I'd have fantasies of getting hit with a hammer so that I would get a nose job by my insurance. Um, and I, but I had friends at school, and I got into theater, which was really, it was my way of trying to learn how to act normal. I just thought that if I could fake acting like other people, that I could be loved. It was as simple as that. And I got good at it. But I was a good comedic actress, a good mimic. I can do accents and things, but I wanted to be an ingenue. But I was too tall, too boobs are too big. It was usually like because ingenues in high school plays are usually like 16-year-olds. So that's usually, Megan was always the ingenue. Well, there were two, Megan Teal was always the ingenue. And, but we did win theater state 2 times. But I was not somebody who ever was sent to doctors or went to therapy. My brother was one who acted out. Um, and I remember, it was so funny. I don't know. Well, I wasn't, because I didn't act out. That's why I didn't have a babysitter. Because when I was 7, like, my brother had a babysitter to walk him home from school because he got in trouble. But I never got in trouble. So I didn't need anyone to watch me, right? Because I didn't do anything that would make people call mom at work or have to pay for something. And that's what my job was. It wasn't to be cared for. But I mean, I knew that I wasn't right because I never had a boyfriend. I was a virgin till I was 21. I would wear very baggy clothing to hide myself. And all of that is pretty typical of sexual abuse survivors, to go kind of extremes of like really hiding, often putting on massive amounts of weight, and or between being hypersexualized. Um, I don't know. I didn't think of myself. I didn't even remember what had happened to my neighbor in full. So I didn't, and most people, it wasn't just that my mom didn't seem like she would be open to me talking about any um, negative childhood experiences. It was very important for her to take times to like announce to me, that nothing happened in your childhood. It's weird. Like she would like literally, because my grandmother was physically abusive and a screamer and an alcoholic. Because when my mom often like if she would get upset and like scream and hit me, and then she would be sad afterwards and really want to talk about how sad she was and she needed a lot of comforting. So I learned about all the hard things she'd been through, and like it was really hard because she had postpartum depression with my brother, and it was so hard on her because like my dad wasn't supportive, and my brother was really needy, and she would just go on long walks with him and want to kill both of them. And that was so hard for her. And it was still hard for her, like, when I was 7 or so, when she was telling me things, how hard it was for her also, that like she couldn't die. Like, because if she died, what would happen to me? And it was like something she worried about all the time, and needed a lot of support. And I learned to really be there when she needed to talk through all the hard things. Um, and I did a good job taking care of her. But in later years, she just really wanted to let me know, remind me that nothing bad ever happened to me. I really never thought about this Baptist couple and their kids who babysat us. They had, I think, 4 kids who were older, teenagers, who babysat us when between the ages of 2 and 7, because I didn't have a lot of memories, and my mom was always talking about how much we liked them and how great they were and how generous they were, taking care of us sometimes even when they didn't need to, and taking us to church with them, things like that. And my mom enjoyed the extra time. But the one memory that I had, that it was kind of like a glitch that would come up over and over. Because I remember Nancy, the mom, this really large, redheaded, mild-mannered woman who just sat on the couch all day, like folding clothes and watching TV. I remembered her. I just remembered her one day, like unlocking a door, and I was screaming, and I was screaming, and I was locked in a door, and she let me out. And her son Wesley, who was like a year younger than me, so he was like 1, I'm like 2.5. He's a real baby, and he was with her. He got to be with her, and I remember I was really upset that he was so spoiled that he got to be a baby and I didn't get to be a baby. And I remember screaming, and I thought Nancy was going to help me, and she just yelled at me for screaming, for being a bad girl. I talked to another kid who went to that babysitter, because it was a family babysitter with like, 4 or 5 kids that they were watching outside the family. And that child said that they were sexually abused by the dad and the teenage brother. Well, he wasn't a teenager, actually. He was like 10, I think, when this started. People don't understand. That's a really dangerous area. Teachers know to watch kids who are older, but because people can't imagine it, but it does happen. And there have been murders by boys of younger children in schools, because nobody would imagine that a 10-year-old would be capable of whatever. You don't want to talk about it. That's why these things are so evil, because you can't talk about it and you can't comprehend it. That's how they get away with it. But then that made me understand the black spots, and it made me understand the mono, and it made me understand the kissing disease. And and my therapist just said, sometimes you just don't know what exactly happened. It doesn't really change your response. You just treat how you present with trauma symptoms. Well, anyway, that's the childhood trauma. I mean, other things happened, but I I was high functioning. And I think I was high functioning up until and through my divorce. It was never a situation where I sought out mental health treatment related to the PTSD. It was just over time I evolved in my healing and sought out different therapies. And I learned about, having a freeze response. Um, I mean, I learned about it partly because when I think I was like 11, I started having migraines. I think it was celiac disease, which is also something like 80%, 70% of people with autoimmune diseases are sexual abuse survivors. It's highly correlated. I think it's a way for young bodies to try to protect the body by, fighting against it when a child can't fight. That's my thought on it. Oh, and this other child who talked about the Snyder family and their abuse mentioned that being locked in rooms and other things that jogged memories, but I still don't remember in full. But the dissociation is something. So when I was 11, I was having migraines and they couldn't locate the reasoning. I'm sure it's probably celiac. And I would just remember thinking while the doctor was talking to my mom, oh, I'll do that thing where I stop feeling. And I just became conscious of like the switch in my brain to turn off feeling. And I think dissociation um, and hypnosis, because I later got into self hypnosis. I think like the kind of the infrastructure of the brain that you turn off is also similar, kind of like to the switches that your brain uses when you switch into a meditative state or a hypnotic state. So it's kind of interesting that I became aware of that switch. And then later on, when I quit smoking, I used self hypnosis and I knew that it could work really well. And then I used it for childbirth. There's a program called Hypnobabies. But the way that it ties to dissociation is for Hypnobabies, they teach you the finger drop technique, which is what it's what I don't know, pain practitioner would teach somebody if they are doing surgery, but they can't take anesthesia. And it's basically practice it over and over, but when your finger drops, and you do it during a contraction, it kind of like floods you. And I'm sure it's just flooding you with dopamine and serotonin, and your body's been trained to do it. But it's similar to dissociation, where you feel like flooded with, like if you're fainting or almost fainting and flooding with that numbing sensation. And I think they are similar. But this is where it becomes problematic, is because our body has a pain response for good reason. Sometimes we need to, if we're standing impaled on something, we need to move our foot and move. So that's why diabetic people need to have foot checks. So when I learned this finger drop technique and I did Hypnobabies over and over, it was implanted that I would feel a cramping sensation. And so that's how I experienced it. You know, I didn't raise my voice, didn't scream, kind of had some period cramps and a natural childbirth. But at 6 weeks, when I got an IUD inserted, afterward, I was told to expect cramping. And I did experience cramping, but I really think that language, I think it was that word, was what partly set things off. Because for 3 days, like I would go for a run and I was feeling cramping, and I called the nurse and she said, cramping's normal. And I was like, okay. But then I did the thing when you get an IUD, they have you check for the string. And I couldn't find it. So then you have to go in and then they, find it and pull it out. But what happened is I went in and they did an x-ray, and the cramping was, if you're squeamish. So the IUD ruptured my uterus, ruptured out, ruptured in again. Yeah, so it was like 3 ruptures, and then they had to do laparoscopic surgery to remove it. But my point is, the whole time, most people probably, I think most people with their uterus being ruptured with an IUD would scream or go to the hospital. But I was like numb because it was cramping. And that's what dissociation can do. Sometimes when I was younger, I didn't really feel anything like hunger, normal emotions. I had to kind of go through learning how to process those, but that was more just through my daily life. I think that's literally why I was drawn to teach in preschools, because like I needed to learn the preschool feeling curriculum. And I think it's actually, and neuroscience now backs it up, because attunement and reciprocity heal the brain in so many ways and can fill in those gaps. I think that a lot of what our country needs to do to repair the social damage is to repair the attunement and the one-to-one, human-to-human connections, starting with moms and babies who've been separated too much. But the reason I got therapy was because of repeated relationship patterns. Like, it's not like I consciously at all seek out scoundrels, but obviously I have a type. Some of it are certain sexual kinks, certain proclivities have drawn me to a certain type of man. And part of it is just, it's kind of a polarity. Like Peter's narcissism, when I first started dating him, well, first of all, he totally, I mean, when you hear about abusive relationships and love bombing, Peter did it in traditional ways, like taking me to Broadway shows every night and bringing me handbags and just lavishing affection and compliments on me all the time. And none of that ever happened after we were married. But one of the worst things that he did was he he would like make sure that I would go to the doctor and the dentist and took care of me and made me feel really safe. And I remember the first time we took a trip together, which I guess he was just, that was when he decided I was a good mark because, he was a fancy banker. So I wanted to prove that I wasn't trash and take him to see my grandma because my grandma was rich and fancy. And and then he was like, "Oh, another mark." I didn't know I was a mark because I just loved my grandma. I never saw her that way, but he didn't see people the same way as me. But the first time we were supposed to go away together was probably like Columbus Day because it was fall when I was teaching. He was always late, and he just didn't come to pick me up to go to the airport. He just was late. And I was like, "What's happening?" He's like, "Oh, it's fine. They'll just put us on another flight." And I didn't know you could do that because I'm not entitled. Like, I just show up for my flight. And he just showed up everywhere, just where he wanted to, and things just worked. And I was like, wow. So it's part of like the taste of entitlement. Not the money, just the attitude of entitlement. But I think I am so much like his mom. It's like disturbing how much we were alike, like in terms of how much we looked alike, um, and in terms of our temperament. I really loved his mom. She was very sweet. But I think I've tend to run into scoundrels who have very, very doting, accommodating mothers. And I guess I saw my grandmother like that with the men in her life. The men get to be monsters and the women are sweet. And so it was really like recognizing the relationship pattern, which was the biggest weakness. Because obviously I've been married to somebody who committed crimes, and then I went into a long-term relationship with somebody who committed crimes, and I I caught myself putting myself in a situation where I realized something could happen to me and my boy's mother could be hurt. And it was kind of the first time because nobody had ever told me to be careful when I go out in the world. That wasn't something I learned from my mom or my dad, but as a mom, I didn't want to hurt my little boys. So that was how I learned I needed to stop relationships like that. And I tried everything and I did get better, but I'm still in the relationship with Peter, so it doesn't matter how much I heal because I'm not free and I'm not safe.